Hello, welcome everyone. I believe we are waiting for one of our participants to join, but I wanted to welcome you to Equal Rights for All, a conversation on LGBTI rights and the Equal Rights Coalition. Happy Pride. My name is Mark Bromley. I am the chair of the Council for Global Equality. We are a civil society coalition of 30 member organizations, and together we fight for equality for LGBTI individuals globally. We are also proud members of the Equal Rights Coalition. As many of you will know, the Equal Rights Coalition is a coalition of governments and civil society that work together to promote LGBT equality on the world stage. There are 42 member governments in the coalition right now and many more civil society organizations. And we are delighted today to facilitate this conversation with leaders of the governments in the Equal Rights Coalition, particularly the ambassadors to the United Kingdom and the ambassadors from the United Kingdom and Argentina here in Washington. And Argentina and the United Kingdom are co-chairs right now of the Equal Rights Coalition. They're the government co-chairs. We're also joined by the State Department, and the US government and the State Department have been strong supporters of the Equal Rights Coalition since its inception. So we look forward to this conversation and thank our government representatives for joining us. Let me just say a few words about the structure of the conversation, and then I will briefly introduce our participants, and then we'll jump into a conversation. So on the technology side, as you probably know, all of you are muted so that we can have a more productive conversation with a large number of people. We do invite you to submit questions for this conversation, but please submit questions in the Q&A function that you'll find at the bottom middle of your screen. The chat function is disabled, but we are using the question and answer function, and we will try to get through a number of questions from all of you. So when you're submitting questions, please try to include your name and affiliation, and we will get to those as soon as we can. So with that, let me briefly introduce our government representatives. And I think we've agreed that Ambassador Arguello from Argentina will speak first. Again, I'm going to keep these short to allow for conversation. Ambassador Arguello is a former member of the National Congress of Argentina and chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. He was a former permanent representative of Argentina to the United Nations. And this is his second posting, I believe, in Washington as ambassador. So welcome. Sorry that your arrival this time coincided with COVID, but welcome to Washington. We also have with us Ambassador Pierce, the British ambassador here in Washington. Prior to coming to Washington, she was also a permanent representative to the United Nations for the United Kingdom. She served in several senior roles in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And this also is her second posting, I believe, to Washington. So thank you, Ambassador. And then we also have Acting Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Scott Busby of the Human Rights Bureau at the State Department. He is joining us as well. Thank you, Scott. Scott has worked on human rights issues in and out of the US government for decades. I've had the pleasure of working with him for at least 15 years on these equality issues. He's served, in addition to serving in the Bureau of Human Rights, he served as the former Director of Human Rights on the National Security Council in the White House, and has worked on refugee issues at the State Department and with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. So thank you all for joining us. I thought we would open up the conversation by asking each of you to talk a little bit at the end of this Pride celebration about your government's national priorities around LGBTI inclusion, and particularly how you are thinking about leveraging the opportunities of the Equal Rights Coalition to promote equality on the global stage. And it's certainly been challenging in this time of COVID, but we also hope that there are a lot of opportunities at this unique moment in history to leverage the ERC to promote equality. So with that, I would ask each of you to maybe offer some observations for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll try to start in with a rich discussion. I think we decided that Ambassador Arguello would offer remarks first, followed by Ambassador Pierce, and then Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Busby. So with that, Ambassador Arguello, I turn it over to you.
Can you listen to me?
Yep, we hear you loud and clear. Thank you, Ambassador.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. It is such a pleasure to participate in this discussion on LGBTI rights and the Equal Rights Coalition as we round up a very unusual Pride Month, one that has kept us physically distanced, but nevertheless embracing the opportunity to commemorate the history of LGBTI movement, to take stock of the progress made in recent years, and to recognize what still needs to be done in the fight for equality. I want first to express my satisfaction for sharing this timely discussion with Ambassador Karen Pierce. As you all know, and as you said, Mark, our countries are co-chairs of the EEOC. I am happy to also share this virtual panel with Acting Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary Scott Busby, with whom our embassy has been working for many years now. And finally, allow me to also thank our moderator, Mark Bromley. The work done by him and his team at the Council for Global Equality is of utmost importance for the protection and promotion of LGBTI rights, and also very valuable to the ERC as a strong civil society partner. Now, to the topic of our conversation. As you know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights enshrines in its first article that, and I quote, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights," unquote. However, 70 years later, discriminatory attitudes based on sexual orientation and gender identity are still strongly entrenched in all regions of the world. Clearly, some countries are doing better than others, but the truth is that even in those who are doing better and where legal equality has been achieved in many fronts, real equality remains a challenge that should not be underestimated. This gap between what the law says and what real life is for many in the LGBTI community constitutes a problem everywhere, a response to stereotypes and prejudices that persist in society and cause discrimination. The laws to protect LGBTI people from discrimination are necessary, but it is not enough. Changing hearts and minds takes time and perseverance. It takes the commitment of civil society, advocates, governments, and the private sector. Everyone must be involved. Going to Argentina, my country is a country committed to the fight against all forms of discrimination, including discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. At the national level, our country has advanced public policies and laws that guarantee and promote the exercise of the rights of the LGBTI community with a transversal perspective that covers specific issues of access and non-discrimination in all aspects of people's lives. The promotion and protection of the rights of LGBTI people is a state policy, which is reflected in the continuity and deepening of public policies that aim to build a more equal society. In this regard, when I think of the progress we have accomplished in the last decade, two laws come to my mind right away: the same-sex marriage law and the gender identity law. In 2010, Argentina became the first country in Latin America and the 10th in the world to allow same-sex marriage throughout its territory. Under this law, people of the same sex who have entered into marriage have the exact rights as heterosexual spouses, including the right to adopt a child. 2 years later, in 2012, the Argentine Congress passed the gender identity law, a milestone that that made of Argentina one of the world leaders in transgender rights. Under this law, any person of legal age may request that their registered gender information be rectified and that their first name and picture be modified if inconsistent with their self-perceived gender identity. It is important to notice that this is a legal right without having to undergo judicial, psychiatric, or medical procedures. It is an easy and free process. We are now celebrating the 8th anniversary of the gender identity law. And you know what? About 9,000 people throughout the country have changed their ID for it to reflect who they truly are. This is a law that made life easier for thousands of people whose identity was being ignored. Today, although trans people and other diverse identities have a greater breadth of right, there is still work to be done on equitable programs of labor inclusion and access to health, as well as combating other serious problems such as the constant acts of discrimination and transphobia that continue to damage lives. And because we are proud of everything we have accomplished in Argentina, but yet realize that there still is a lot to do in order to guarantee the LGBTI people are able to be who they are and able to love who they love without fear and to fully enjoy their human rights, it is that President Alberto Fernandez, back in December, at the very moment when he took office, established for the first time in our history, the Ministry of Women, Genders, and Diversity. In fact, one of the main lines of work of the ministry is to design, execute, and evaluate national public policies aimed at equality and diversity with the goal of promoting the autonomy of LGBTI people. At the international level, Argentina upholds a position of a strong commitment to the protection and promotion of the rights of LGBTI people, supporting resolutions on the matter in the Human Rights Council and being part of all existing LGBT core groups in the various global and regional forums. Argentina is co-chairing, together with the Netherlands, the LGBTI core group of the United Nations General Assembly. Likewise, we promote the creation of the OAS LGBTI core group, which are currently coordinating. Similarly, for the past year now, Argentina has been co-chairing the Equal Rights Coalition, EEOC, with the United Kingdom. We are doing our best to navigate this responsibility amid the delicate situation we are all going through. We are convinced that the EEOC is key for coordinating positions and making calls for attention to serious violations of the rights of the LGBTI community. It is a mechanism that allows states to work side by side with civil society and sign joint declarations or take steps towards the effective defense of the rights of LGBTI community. Going to my close, I should say that 4 years after the creation of the EEOC, and as one of the founding members, Argentina believes that it is time to strengthen the EEOC through a renewed strategy that sets new objectives and reaffirms the work that EEOC has been doing so far. This has been a priority for Argentina and the United Kingdom as co-chairs. And having said that, I will end here, happy to answer questions later on. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Pierce, we'll turn it over to you. Sorry, Ambassador Pierce, I think you're muted.
should be okay now. Thank you, Mark. Is that okay?
Yep.
Yes, yes.
Yep,
good.
perfect. Thank you.
Happy Pride, everybody. Really delighted to be here and taking part with my good friend Jorge and with Scott. I want to pay a particular tribute to all those people who work on the Equal Rights Coalition, and if I may, particularly to Jessica of Outright. When I was in New York, we worked very closely with Jessica and the Equal Rights Coalition, and I think we've made some progress. I agree, Mark, with absolutely everything Jorge said about the importance of this issue, about the importance of equality, about the human rights framework and the work that ERC does. One of the things Argentina and the UK are doing on the ERC is producing a strategy that will guide ERC's future work. And we'd be happy to talk about that later. I'll talk, if I may, about a couple of things that the United Kingdom is doing. Firstly, I think since same-sex marriage was legalized in 2012 in the UK, the atmosphere has become much easier to have very detailed debates and discussions of these subjects and take them to the next level so that we can truly work out how to make society equal for everyone. And one of the things we did a couple of years ago, we did a survey of over 100,000 LGBTQ people to find out what sorts of difficulties they encountered. And one of the things that shocked me was how many people said they didn't even feel they could hold hands in public, you know, a totally innocuous activity. So this was the largest national survey of LGBTQ people in the world to date. And we came out with an action plan, and I'll read, if I may, what that commits us to. It commits us to appoint a national LGBT health advisor to provide leadership on reducing the health inequalities that the LGBT community faces. It allows us to extend the anti-homophobic, biphobic and transphobic bullying program in our schools. We will bring forward proposals to end the practice of conversion therapy in the UK, and we'll take further action on LGBTQ hate crime, and we'll improve the recording and reporting and police response to hate crime. So there's more to do there. That's an active program of work, but we are really committed to taking this forward, and we talk in the United Nations about it as well. One of the other things we did in 2018 at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, the Prime Minister committed to assist any Commonwealth country who wanted to overcome their colonial era legislation in the area of equality and LGBTQ rights. And that's an offer from the United Kingdom. We recognise our historical responsibility for that legislation. Sadly, only a handful of countries in the Commonwealth actually have updated their legislation, but this is something that we think is very important. The fact that the Commonwealth largely has a homogenous legal system based on common law is helpful in this respect, and that's an offer we have made to try and help countries overcome the past. And we also have got in parallel a major program on gender equality and LGBTQ equality. We very much value the Pride marches. This is an important week. We have lit the embassy up in Pride colours. If any of your listeners are in Washington and going down Massachusetts Avenue, and I'm sitting in front of a banner I was given in New York to celebrate one of our Pride marches there. So I can assure everybody this is going to be remain a very important issue for the United Kingdom. We really value our partnership with Argentina in the Equal Rights Coalition, and I haven't rehearsed what Jorge said about the international framework and the importance of this issue, but just for the sake of completeness, I agree with every word he said. Nobody should be discriminated against for who they are or whom they love. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And we're going to go to Peter Scott Busby. Thanks, Scott.
Can you hear me, Mark?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, good. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and happy Pride. It's my pleasure to join all of you today to discuss the ERC and the work that we're doing at the State Department to protect and defend the human rights of LGBTI persons around the world. Before I begin, let me offer a special thanks to Ambassador Arguello and Ambassador Pierce for their leadership on this issue and their co-chairpersonship of the Equal Rights Coalition. And thanks as well to my colleague, Mark Bromley, with whom I've had a long-standing collaboration on these issues. Unfortunately, the struggle to end violence, abuse, and discrimination against LGBTI persons continues to be a global challenge. As a nation, the United States is, of course, founded on the principles of freedom and equality, and thus we remain committed to protecting and defending the human rights of all people, including LGBTI persons, as well as the elderly, persons with disabilities, and religious and ethnic minorities. Specifically in the human rights context, the State Department focuses our LGBTI efforts on mitigating violence and abuses targeting LGBTI persons and opposing laws that criminalize LGBTI status and/or conduct. To achieve these goals, we believe it's crucial to consult with local LGBTI activists and human rights defenders in the countries where we're trying to advance the rights of LGBTI persons and to assist them in developing their priorities and tactics. As our efforts are underscored by the guiding principle of do no harm, we do not always publicize the type of engagement we are involved in. Around the world, our diplomats continue to take steps to promote the human rights of LGBTI persons. We meet with them regularly. We march in pride parades. We display the pride flag, just as the UK Embassy is doing now. We sponsor training workshops. We promote cultural exchanges. And we use our good offices to bring together like-minded countries and civil society partners in support of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Just as we're doing today in the COVID-19 era, our embassies are continuing to work with others, including through the Equal Rights Coalition, to advance the human rights of LGBTI persons. With our partners in the Global Equality Fund, like our Argentine friends, the United States and our embassies around the world are supporting locally led advocacy by civil society who are fighting for their human rights on the front lines in some of the world's most challenging places. As many of you know, last year at the UN General Assembly, President Trump pledged US support to help end the criminalization of LGBTI status and/or conduct globally. In response to that pledge, my bureau, DRL, has established an LGBTI decriminalization working group to formulate a strategy that will be a key part of the department's broader LGBTI human rights policy. The aim of this strategy is to support local efforts to repeal legal provisions that criminalize LGBT status and/or conduct in the roughly 70 countries that currently maintain such laws. The working group is identifying focus countries from each region where the department can effectively augment programmatic, diplomatic, and policy work to have a near-term impact on decriminalization. I should also mention that LGBTI work on behalf of LGBTI persons has been a focus of ours in the context of the general challenges to democracy and human rights posed by the COVID crisis. As many of you know, certain governments around the world have taken advantage of this crisis to crack down on civil society and marginalized groups, including LGBTI persons. And so in the context of the work that a working group we have established on these issues is doing, we have done specific outreach around the issue of the human rights of LGBTI persons and how those have been affected by the current COVID crisis. I should note, though, that our efforts are not limited to our overseas diplomacy. Here at the State Department, we continue to identify ways our workplace can be more inclusive of LGBT employees. And in fact, this afternoon, Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun will be talking at an event, a Pride event hosted by the Atlantic Council, where he will be discussing these issues as well. We are working with host countries to afford our own LGBTI personnel and their families full diplomatic privileges and immunities. Similarly, we are exploring policies that will better address the needs of our transgender colleagues. Our human rights policy is amplified when we work multilaterally, as we do through the Equal Rights Coalition, and coordinate closely with our international partners. For that reason, the United States remains committed to supporting the ERC as it continues to refine and strengthen its mandate. We're very pleased to hear that the UK and Argentina will be working on a long-term strategy on how to strengthen the ERC, and will be actively participating and supporting them in that effort. We will also continue our active participation on the Executive Committee and the Diplomacy Working Group of the ERC, as well as our leadership of the Donor Coordination Working Group. Looking to the future, we will work with the co-chairs to strengthen the ERC's capacity and encourage new membership in the coalition. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here with you today, and I look forward to your questions and the discussion.
Great, thanks, Scott. Thanks to all. I will maybe start the conversation, but first remind folks who are listening that we welcome your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom middle of your screen. So please feel free to go ahead and submit questions, and I'll try to get to them. We've got about 10 or 12 minutes for a conversation before I know the ambassadors have other engagements. But let me start with a question, and I have two questions, but I'll go ahead and combine them if you don't mind. We are at the end of Pride Month. We're celebrating Pride this year, but at a very unique moment in world history, right? We've all referenced it. We're celebrating Pride in the middle of a global pandemic, and at a moment when all of our nations are having deep national conversation and struggles over greater inclusion and diversity, and to really grapple with the fact that Black Lives Matter in this country and every other country. So in that context, I guess I have two questions for you. First of all, I know the Equal Rights Coalition did put out a statement recently on COVID-19 and the unique vulnerabilities of LGBTI individuals in the context of COVID. But also, as Scott mentioned, the dangers that we face where some governments have used the pandemic to actually roll back protections or persecute their LGBTI communities. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the way in which the ERC is engaging, the importance of that statement that was recently released by the ERC. Scott, not to put you on the spot, but we are disappointed that the US government did not join that statement. So I'd love if you could just tell us a little bit about why the US didn't join, and I know some of the work that is happening nonetheless through your task force and other bilateral engagement. But then just to combine the questions, I know there have been real efforts within the ERC Civil Society Coalition and also the Government Coalition to diversify the Equal Rights Coalition, to bring in more countries from Africa and Asia. And Ambassador Arguello, we've been delighted that Latin America has been a real leader in the coalition. But what efforts are you taking to increase the diversity of the government membership in the ERC? Unique moment of diversity and inclusion. Ambassador Arguello, would you like to kick us off with that?
Yes, of course. Mark, the diversity of the ERC's membership, which includes states at different stages in their LGBTI human rights development, means that it has the potential to draw on a wide pool of experience and information sources to spur action and facilitate peer learning by the sharing of best practices. So yes, it is indeed necessary and desirable to increase the membership of Asian and African countries. For this, we're taking advantage of the fact that my country is also co-chair of the UN LGBTI core group, and we are going to focus on those countries that currently part of the core group, but not of the ERC, and invite them to join us in the coalition. We also hope we can add those countries that have been very helpful, but we have made efforts to renew the mandate of the independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity of the Human Rights Council. An advantage that the ERC presents compared to other groups is that it is relatively easy for countries to become part of it, since there is no need to have a state from another region wanted to join in order to maintain the global north-south balance. They simply need to express interest, and I think diversifying the ERC membership is important, and I'm hopeful we will see results sooner than later. If you want me to make a comment on COVID-19 now, or I can do it later, whatever you say, Mark.
Yeah, just because time is short, if you have any very brief observations, I think we should try to combine those thoughts.
This was how should I say? Last month, working with our ERC partners, we put out a statement on the impact of the coronavirus on LGBTI people. This was an important action because it recognizes that although the virus may seem to strike indiscriminately, its spread and consequences along with measures taken to combat the pandemic affect specific groups differently, depending on existing inequalities and exclusion mechanisms, leaving the most marginalized even more vulnerable. LGBTI persons are among these most vulnerable groups, and hence we need to take into account their reality when we design and implement measures and policies related to the pandemic. In Argentina, the Ministry of Women, Genders and Diversity is working on this together with other ministries and other agencies and in coordination with all provinces. The impact of this crisis on the trans population, for instance, is quite acute. We know most of them are not part of the formal job sector, and the quarantine measures impacted them in a very harsh way, making everything harder for them. Recognizing this challenge, the ministry has strengthened food assistance for trans people, coordinating with the community centers and the civil society organizations for the delivery of food during the period of isolation. I could say that in addition, a significant number of trans people were incorporated into social programs of the Ministry of Social Development, which seeks to guarantee a monthly economic income for all those who are facing a vulnerable situation.
Thank you, Ambassador. That's helpful. Ambassador Pierce? Whoops, sorry, I think you're muted again, Ambassador Pierce, sorry.
Sorry, my ability to cope with the IT. So I think Jorge set out very well what the ERC is doing. I think one of the ways we can all particularly contribute at the moment to ensuring that LGBT communities are properly supported and protected. One way is obviously through the United Nations and the meetings that take place there, whether that's in New York, in the General Assembly, in the Security Council and elsewhere, or whether it's in the WHO. So I think that's quite important. And UK is part of the core group on all that. I think another way is through our bilateral assistance to developing countries. So British embassies around the world all have an objective to support LGBT rights. And at the current time, a lot of that is on supporting equality before the law and equality of health outcomes. And I think this focus on the judicial, while not the only element we need to think about, we have found that it can be a helpful way in to a difficult conversation with some host countries. So as I say, our embassies around the world have quite large programs to support equality and particularly LGBT rights.
Great, thank you, Ambassador. Scott Busby.
Thanks, Mark. We strongly agree with your comments, Mark, around diversifying the coalition geographically, as Ambassador Arguello described. But as I mentioned in my remarks, we think it's given the threats that a variety of marginalized groups face in the current crisis, including other ethnic, racial, religious minorities, the elderly, disabled persons. We think it's a good opportunity to sort of draw connections and commonalities among those groups in pushing back against the challenges they face in the current crisis. As to why we didn't join the statement was a long one, many details in it, and there were certain elements of it that we felt were inconsistent with US law and policy, but that does not mean that we don't support the core of what the Equal Rights Coalition is doing. And indeed, as many of you saw, we did issue a statement on our mission to the UN in New York, and have issued other statements affirming our commitment to protecting and promoting the human rights of LGBTI persons.
Thank you, Scott. I know, Ambassador Arguello, you have a hard stop right about now. We do have one interesting question from the question and answer box. I wonder if I could ask you, Ambassador Arguello, to offer any closing remarks, and Ambassador Pierce, it sounded like you might have a moment to answer another question, and Scott, I don't know if you have a moment as well. Thank you. Great. Ambassador Arguello, thank you. I don't know if you have a closing thought.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much to everyone. I would like to say that Argentina is committed to and believes in the importance and enormous potential of ERC. And we haven't talked about this yet, but a priority for Argentina and the United Kingdom as co-chairs has been elaborating a 5-year strategic plan, 2020-2025. That plan will define a clear purpose and objectives with the aim of guiding the work of the ERC to defend LGBTI people worldwide in a coherent and effective way. As it was mentioned, the strategic plan includes elements that reinforce the role that civil society can play in guiding and supporting the ERC. It also seeks to increase stakeholders' participation with the private sector, academia, entertainment, sports, and other potential strategic partners. I think this plan will truly make a difference and have a positive impact. So finally, I want to reiterate my most sincere appreciation to Karen, Scott, and you, Mark, for this discussion, as well as anyone who had turned in. Thank you very much, and happy Pride.
Happy Pride. Thank you, Ambassador. And one final question. We have an interesting question from Jane Ozame. I hope I'm getting the name correct. Asking about certain clashes of rights that there's what she describes as an increasingly toxic debate between those who are claiming religious rights and religious liberties, and particularly those seeking to protect the rights of transgender individuals. What is the best way, do you think, to deal with that toxic debate? And how might the Equal Rights Coalition provide a forum to have those conversations diplomatically in a space that can really make a difference? I wonder if either of you have any thought on that. Ambassador?
Is this unmuted now? Yes, good. Thank you. I think that is, in general terms, rights shouldn't clash. Rights are indivisible. Jorge mentioned earlier the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which should continue to be our watchword, I think. And it sets out a very good basis, very good framework right across the lists of rights. And I think coming from a British political tradition, we also believe very strongly that the issues should be aired and should be debated in as free a manner as possible. And, you know, the old distinction between offence and harm can sometimes be helpful here. I know not everybody agrees with that. And we also in the UK have some quite strong laws and practices against hate speech. But in general terms, we believe these issues should be debated. I think the current issue around the transgender space, if I may, I have not been involved in any of these discussions directly, but it is obvious that it's a very difficult area, and that actually I would support more dialogue so that we can work our way towards working out what might be the best possible approach to the issue that completely supports the notion that everybody is equal before the law, everybody has equal rights under the Universal Declaration and before the law, but doesn't inadvertently put certain categories of people at more risk because of certain practices that were done in the interests of equality policy. So we need to look after those people who perhaps don't want to use the facilities and services that are on offer, but we mustn't, in my view, do anything that cuts across that very important principle of equality. But as I say, it is a very tricky and sensitive area. You'll have seen the debate in the UK at the moment between J.K. Rowling and some of the Harry Potter actors and actresses, and I think that illuminates just quite how sensitive this is for some people. So I think the Equal Rights Coalition can help by sponsoring more dialogue on how we craft a way forward that is helpful to everybody.
Thank you, Ambassador. And Scott, I know we've obviously had difficult national conversations around transgender equality as well. What are your thoughts on that question?
My first thought is that I think there are a core of rights around which we all agree, which is that no one should be killed, physically harmed, thrown in jail, or denied access to essential services such as healthcare based on who they are or who they love. There are challenges that, as you allude, Mark, we are debating here in the United States. I do think to the extent that the ERC would be able to provide a forum for discussion of those issues, I think it would be a good thing. But I do think it's important to go back to the core principles that guide both the ERC along with American foreign policy in terms of protecting the fundamental rights of all persons, including LGBTI persons.
Thank you for that. Well, we are over time, so let me offer some thanks and then maybe a final word to Ambassador Pierce and Pete S. Busby. Thank you to all of you for joining. Thank you particularly for the British Embassy for organizing the technology behind this. Josh Stanton has been working with us to get us up to speed on the technology, so thank you for that. And thank you to the two ambassadors, to Pete S. Busby. Thank you for your time and your commitment. It's clear that you are committed to the ERC, to these issues, and this is a difficult moment for all of us, for all of our nations, but a moment when the ERC is more important than ever. So thank you for that commitment, and we look forward as civil society to working with you and with the 42 member governments as we go forward. So again, happy Pride, thanks to all, and I will give the closing comments. Maybe we'll start with you, Scott, if you have any final thoughts, and then Ambassador Pierce, since you folks organized the technology and really led us in this, you can offer your final comments.
Thanks, Mark. Well, let me just reiterate again the U.S. commitment to remaining part of the EEOC and our fundamental commitment to continuing to protect and promote the rights of LGBTI persons. That will continue to be reflected in our annual human rights report. It will continue to guide our diplomatic activities overseas, and it will continue to inform the programmatic work that we do to support the individuals and groups on the ground working to promote and protect these same rights. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Scott. And Ambassador Pierce?
Well, thank you very much, Scott, and thanks to Mark, you and the Council for Global Equality, and Jorge and the audience. I think I'll close by noting, this will remain an important priority for the UK, for both our domestic and our foreign policy. And we look forward to cooperating with any country that has the same goals of wanting to advance equality for all of services and before the law. We were going to hold an LGBT conference in London in May, and that unfortunately, because of COVID, has obviously not taken place. But I wanted to reassure everybody that we are looking for a way to have the conference, possibly virtually, possibly through other means, and that we'll be coming back to everybody shortly on plans on that. But let me close by just repeating how important this issue is and how important it is that we all defend that issue of equality, and that you can count on the UK to continue working with partners to do that.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you to all for joining, and happy Pride. I think that will conclude.
Happy Pride.
Happy Pride. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.